Welcome to the show. Today's topic is owning your power. I want to take a minute to say hello to our listeners in Humacao, Puerto Rico. Thanks for tuning into the show. We're so glad to have you here. It's nice to know we have listeners there. Very exciting. So we are Rozlyn Reynolds. I'm Ivory LaNoue and Terri Ann Russell. We are the Sedona Soul Sisters. So this owning your power, we've been kind of chatting about this in the little bit of time we have together through the previous week about how that is so critical. You know, if you don't step into your power, you're not owning your life. If you don't own your power, you don't realize how much control you have over every aspect of your life. Anybody you would have some starting thoughts on that, ladies?
I mean, that's one of the premier situations to deal with, to manage, because if you don't own your power, everything else takes you over. You know, you're at the mercy of a lot of other situations, and you just have to step into it. Be in charge.
Absolutely. And I always think about a couple things come to mind when this topic comes up. The first being that if you are tired of being a victim or feeling like a victim or being treated like a victim, best thing you can do is dive inside and find your strength, find that core of strength. How do you find it? Finding it is a big part of it is boundaries, setting boundaries and upholding them will help you find your power and own it. Any other thoughts on that? How to own your power?
I think there's a negative perception when you say the word power, don't you? It's like, I think people have a lot of fear around it.
Well, they think of like people going crazy with it, you know, with absolute power corrupts absolutely, but that's not what we're talking about.
No, and it's not about control. I think control is much different than power, right? But I think when you're setting boundaries and you're speaking up for yourself, those things are really important to stepping into that role of who you are, because then I think setting boundaries, I know for me personally, was one of the hardest things I've had to do. The biggest lesson.
You know why? The pushback you get. Oh my goodness, when you set boundaries with somebody for the first time, they do not like it. And if they are toxic personalities, they are going to push back hard. So you really have to step into your power. You really have to own it. And just like, it's not about controlling another person. It's about controlling yourself, where you know in your mind things you're willing to accept and things you're not willing to accept. And then you act on it. Somebody acts in a way that you've let them know you're not going to accept, or it's just pretty standard in society, unacceptable, then you just don't hang around them anymore. You just don't spend time with them. The hardest thing with that's always families, right?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. You know, I don't know a single person or client that hasn't run into this where there's somebody in their family they need to set boundaries with, and it's really hard. The family dynamics kick in, but if you think you're important enough to improve your life, to feel better about yourself, increase your self-esteem, take control of your life, then you're just going to have to be strong enough to be ready to withstand that pushback, and more than once.
That's a good point. And it's your life, right? So often we get, from being a child and being raised by our parents, they have so many views about how we should live our life. And then you become into an adult and some parents still have that, how you should live your life. And I think finally when you realize that it's your life and you can't live it for anybody else, and even though, everybody may think you're crazy about what you're doing or where you're going, I think it's important to be true to yourself. That's the only way I find in this crazy world that we live in, is to be true to yourself and who you are.
I'm going to give a clear example of that. And any of my family that's listening will know it's true. When I was working as program coordinator for the mental health program for this county. And I loved my work, loved my career in mental health. And then I didn't tell my family, my angels told me I have to do this. I think that's too much for most people who are not really on that place in their journey. So I kept that little bit to myself, but I said, I'm switching careers. And I vividly remember my parents going, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to be a psychic medium. I'm going to do this work. And they had no idea I'd been doing it on the side. None of my family knew that I'd been doing that on the side. And I remember my mother crying, and they expressed that I was throwing my career away. I would regret it. Oh, it's the worst thing I could do. What are you thinking? You're not going to be able to survive. Why would you do this? And that was the mild reaction from my family. So I had to stand firm. Like, I know what my angels tell me to do. And I know my angels know what's right for me. They've guided me very surely through things, and I trust them. And I'm sorry that my family could not understand that. But now it's interesting. They're very supportive. And here's what's happened. A couple things that have made them more supportive. Two of my sisters, one lives in Georgia, one lives in the Phoenix area, both had somebody in their life who either was a big fan of my podcast, The Angel Room, or read my book, was reading my book, and was just like, oh my God, you have the same book I have. And she's like, that's my sister wrote that. So it legitimized me in their eyes, and they like had an epiphany moment that, oh, she's really helping people with this. She's doing something with this. She must know what she's doing here. And it's been a shift. So that took years. That took years to happen. But if you know something's right for you, or your angels, your guides are telling you something, I think that's more important than what anybody else tells you.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to tune in and talk about, feeling, empowered. Who's stronger? Who's more into your spirituality, your soul, and everything else than your angelic input?
Mm-hmm.
But that's so hard for people to process. And it's ironic. I mean, a lot of the things that I have done, and I remember, coming out sort of
Mm-hmm.
and stating, I'm doing readings. I mean, processing that for people was like, whoa.
Oh yeah.
But for me, it was the most natural thing. And I'd been doing it in my, regular life, not in the traditional reading format, but I did that too. But yeah, that part of my life was kind of tucked away from anyone seeing that. And when I finally just said, yeah, this is what I do, I mean, whoa, it was like a total challenge of like, what? You do what? Like going, people, I've always been this way. Hello.
It's like you drop a bomb into the family.
Really, it was pretty amazing. And, in fairness to people, if they have always seen you from your whole life, from childhood, they get this concept of who you are. And when you try to shift that or change that, wow, it just rocks their world. So it's hard.
It is. And yes, this is certainly true for, people who are light workers, who are working toward their mission, or actually working their mission. But those of you who are just living your life and realizing something doesn't work for you anymore, and you're afraid to take action about that, I think that's where you are owning your power to say, okay, I chose to, and this is just some examples, I chose to marry this person. So I need to make sure I do everything I can to make it work. And if it isn't going to work, then I need to get out of this, because this is my life and no one's going to take care of me better than I will. And it's not about being selfish. It's about self-care. That is a big part of owning your power, is realizing what works for you and what doesn't, and then taking action. You don't want to hurt other people. You never want to hurt other people, but you can't not do what's right for you because you're worried about hurting other people. And I think that's where a lot of people, and particularly women, get stuck. And they're like right here, like here's the door to their power, and they've got their hand on the doorknob and they're afraid to turn that doorknob and walk through. So close.
Yeah.
The other thing it makes me think about is, again, when I was still working in mental health and my friend was Stepping Stones, a domestic violence shelter in Prescott Valley, asked if I would run classes for them. And I did it on a volunteer basis, just to go once a week and run these what they call building blocks with the ladies who were there. And it was really good. I was so impressed with their program, still am, talked about it to many people, because unlike most domestic violence shelters, they believed in having the women look at how they got into the situation, where they could have made better choices, and what can we do now. I saw that instantly as so teaching these women to own their power, to find their power, take back control of their life. And I saw women, a lot of women, make massive turnarounds in their life because of learning this information. And I felt like I learned more. I was actually in a terrible relationship at the time that I was teaching those classes. And it was like, oh, yeah, I need this information too. You know how that goes. Sometimes you're talking to a client and you realize this is for me too.
Surprise. Yeah, and it can apply to any area in your life. Even just like I remember years ago when I just started and I went right into corporate, and that's what was assumed that I would do. 20 years old, out of high school, going right into corporate. But people, I don't think at that time owned a lot of businesses. Now it's much more prevalent, where it's much more acceptable for you to create your own business and do something that you love. And so it's a much different time that we live in. So I think the younger people now, they're much more apt to take those chances or do those things. And it's not viewed as negative as it was when I was growing up.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Terri Ann, because I can't even count the number of women that I've seen. And primarily my clientele are women. I do have males, but this has been a woman thing primarily, to say that they got into the corporate world because that was the expectation, or that's what everybody did. That's kind of like their social group expectation. And at some point, sometimes it was 20 years or more in, they realized, I hate this. I hate the environment. It's toxic for me. And I want out. And they almost need to talk to somebody who can tell them, if you feel you need to get out, then you probably need to get out. They need that verification. It's okay for you to leave the corporate world. And sometimes it's taking big leaps of faith, really, really stepping out on a limb and trusting that your angels guided you that far. They're not going to drop the ball now. Go ahead, Roz.
Well, I think we have to realize too, I remember being in high school. You were expected as a woman at that time. We were undergoing, the whole step into your power revolution. With women, that was a revolutionary time. And when you spoke out and you said, oh, I want to do this. I remember when I was in high school, ironically, I didn't want to take home ec. I didn't want to take cooking and sewing and all that stuff. I wanted to take auto shop because my dad was a mechanic and I hung out in the garage with him all my life. And I was darn good at it. I'm pretty mechanical, I just kind of had a knack for it. They wouldn't even let me take it. Wow. Because I wasn't a boy. And I threw such a fit and raised so much angst over the fact that to shut me up, I think, the following year, they let girls take it. And they let them take wood shop too. And in 1968, this was a 69, this was a big deal. So, you're talking about what the expectation of the culture was when you're talking about, okay, you get out of high school and then you take a corporate job being a little secretary somewhere, and you are the secretary to this man who rises up on the ranks in the company, and you're still down here being the secretary making, let's say it, icky money. So I think we have to look at the bigger picture of changes in the culture too. And, these corporations are still full of men who want that same thing to be happening now. So when you step into your power with a lot of these people, man, you happen to go into one of the acceptable psychology. Women have to do that. But, if you said you wanted to do anything else that was outside those parameters of what was acceptable, it wasn't well received. So I think, we have to look at that too, and we have to be realistic. There's still so many people in so many places, so many women who would step into their gifts and their power, and they're not allowed. There's parts of the country that those old values are still very much there. So
I know what you're talking about, Roz, and it makes me think about when I was a girl, and that was the late 60s, early 70s. And I had big dreams, and it wasn't being a secretary or a nurse or a teacher. Never wanted to be one of those. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to write. I wanted to be traveling the world, and I never, ever thought about being married or being a mother. Like, that was not in my plans. Boy, how that changed on a dime. But I didn't fit into that mold. And a lot of the girls that I knew were like, when I get married, and they would play getting married. And I was like, I could not relate to that. Like, it's not that anything against it. I just wasn't like focused on that. But it's been a fight all along. It's been a fight every step of the way for women particularly. And we're coming into a very challenging time now where we're going to need to really find our power and make sure that further of our rights are not taken away from us, and that we retain what women fought so hard for so many years, that we don't let small group of people take that away from us. So I feel like stepping into your power on a personal level and on a larger scale is so critical right now. Go ahead, Terri Ann.
I agree. I was going to say, when I work with clients and they come in and they feel really disempowered, I look at those past lives. I look at their mothers, their grandmothers, because we were just talking about that. They come from a different time. And so that whole generation had this much different thinking than we have. And those beliefs, those thoughts, they've passed those down to their children, and we've passed those down. And so they continue. And so when someone kind of comes in and they're disempowered, I always look at that either through past lives or ancestral, because a lot of times it is just that. It's just a thought form that's been formed since they were a child that said, no, it has to be this way. And when they start looking at what that is, well, I don't want to do that. Like you said, I don't want to get married and I don't want to have children yet. And everybody's doing that. And then everybody else thinks, oh, well, there's something wrong with you because you're doing that. It really makes you feel disempowered. So looking at that stuff, sometimes they see a different perspective from it than understanding that that was formed long before they could form their own thought patterns about what it was. And I think it empowers them then.
Absolutely. And I can't help but thinking about so many times with clients where I'm telling them, I'm glad you come to me for insights. I'm glad you come to me for clarification. But the real goal here is for you to come to a place where 99% of the time you can tap into your own intuition, and you know yourself so well that you just have a really strong feeling of what you need to do. And it's only when you're stuck, when you really can't think your way through it, when you've got so much trauma going on that you really can't do that for yourself, that then you need me. And that's my goal, because I feel like otherwise I'm disempowering people. And I want to be part of empowering people. Everyone has intuition. You know yourself better than anyone else. You know, you may start your journey in a very confused place and not know where to go, but you pretty quickly get your feet under you, and you know what's right for you. That's the truth.
Yeah, most times, right? Sometimes when we're really close to it, we've all talked about this, it's really hard.
And that's when you need that's when you need to go to somebody and say, can you take a look at this for me, and be honest with yourself that you're in that, you're too close to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, we do that with each other, and you got to have somebody you can go to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought you wanted to say something, Roz. You looked.
I just think it's all true, you know, and the more you expand your mind around this, the more you are going into limitless territory. And
I agree.
the interesting thing is, you know, I read these things where women are realizing, like, I need to just open my own business and do everything that, you know, I feel inspired to do. Unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of financial difficulty with that for a lot of women, because a lot of women are the ones who have the positions that secure insurance for their family, ensure that second income that's required, which has all been created for us. You know, where you can't really get by anymore with a family with one income unless it's a major income. So all of this has been created, you know, for us. But the bottom line is, when you tap into what you know in your heart and your spirit and your soul that you're supposed to be doing, you know, finding that doorway, like you were talking about, you know, you got your hand on the knob, but there has to be, within that taking your power, you know, there has to be the balance of that power commanding a certain amount of income.
100%, 100%. And I have to say, like, my big epiphany moment with this need to empower was a painful one, because it was getting out of that last toxic relationship I was in. Towards the end of it, I realized that I had thought that my angels would just swoop me out of it and save me, or somebody would save me. I don't know who this nebulous someone was. And I've just realized I have to save myself. And that's something I've said to clients in similar situations, is really, you've got to save yourself. And that's why I use that picture of the little girl in the superhero costume, because you need to become your own superhero, where you swoop in and save yourself. And how do you do that? You take the steps you need to take to change the situation, whatever that is for you. You know, it's not always about a relationship. It can be about, again, it can be about work. It can be about letting people abuse you and not setting boundaries with them. All these things are just really key pieces to finding your power. How do you own it until you find it? You know, and you have it in you. Even the people that someone might describe as a doormat, that just means they haven't set boundaries yet. You're not stuck being in that position. You haven't saved yourself yet. So here's what happens when people first start to do that, especially with boundaries, they tend to go overboard and get a little zealous with it, and a little angry and strident with it. I don't want this, you know, instead of just saying, hey, I just want to let you know, I don't like it when you say such and such. And so I'm just asking you, please don't talk to me like that again. Don't say those kind of things to me again. And then if they do it again, it's not that they crossed your boundary. Your boundary is what you do now. What do you do now? So what are you going to do? And I'm not going to say it on this show because our role is not to tell you what to do or what not to do. As a matter of fact, it's not ethical, but it's to give you insights and give you information so you can make a clear decision for yourself with whatever the issue or issues are that are disempowering you. And it usually starts in childhood, right?
Yeah. And when you decide that, it's a learning process, right? It's a learning curve. We're all here to learn. So you're going to fall down. You're going to make mistakes. I think a lot of times we just want the answers, right? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it, And I've said it too, like just tell me and I'll do it. But that's the easy way. We have to really work at it sometimes. And that's part of our learning process here, is to how to set those boundaries, or what to do if somebody crosses it, or whatever instance it's affecting you anywhere in your life, is you taking the time to tap into what is that? What do I need to do? What feels good to me when I'm doing this?
And I just wanted to say, just to clarify something, there are times that angels have literally saved my life. It's been multiple times they have saved my life. And I'm not totally sure that they haven't saved my life in that last relationship. I could have easily died a couple times in that relationship. And in my first marriage, when he was so physically violent and choked me repeatedly, I could have died. That's so lethal position to be in. So they probably did save me from dying, but did they yank me out of it? No. That's when you got to just kind of take a step back and try to disengage emotionally from the situation. Again, whether it's a love relationship, a friendship, work, whatever it is, a social group, it doesn't matter what isn't working. Take a step back, detach emotionally, and look at it very objectively. If I was looking at this situation and it was my sister or my best friend, and they asked me for advice, what would I suggest they do? And then how about doing that? How about doing that? And one little step gets the ball rolling. Anytime you're stuck, one positive step makes things start moving forward, and then it's easier to take the next one and the next one, and you get braver. And you know why? Because you're stepping into your power, you're owning it. Any other thoughts on how people can own their power? I think that's always so helpful. I like discussing these things, but it's so nice when people get some tools to take with them. Dead silence.
I think you have to, one thing that's really important is you have to tap into, your sense of what is right and what works for you. And that's a big factor, because, a lot of times, especially in these situations with family and friends, they have an opinion, and that's fine. That their opinion doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's right and what feels good and what it's that inner knowing that when you tap into that, it's much easier to establish, your sense of power within yourself, and realizing that, you have to do the thing that feels right to you. I'm sure a lot of us are in situations, I've certainly been in that situation, where you can feel that you need to make a change and you need to move some things in a different direction in your life. But, establishing that confidence in your power, even though you know those things, isn't easy. So we have to tune in and feel what we need to be doing. And of course, I talk to God a lot, and Jesus, so my angels too.
It's very much like when you're training somebody to tap into their intuition and to use it more, is how do you trust your intuition? You use it and you follow it and see what happens. And when enough times that your intuition is right, then you start to trust it, and that increases and increases. And that's true for people in many different aspects of life, not just your intuition, but your intuition comes into play in what is your gut reaction to something. Gut reaction is another word for intuition. I'm telling you right now, I think that's just your intuition talking to you, just knowing something. But it also comes into play with trusting your own judgment. And that's even outside of intuition, but your own judgment. You know, if a situation is not right for you. And let's go back, let's kind of circle back to the whole thing of being in a corporate position and realizing that it's toxic for you. You hate it. All of a sudden, it's just, you realize it's just not working for me. So maybe you've raised your frequency so high that it no longer meshes with the environment of that office. If you're working with a bunch of people whose frequency is here and yours even goes to here, well, it's not going to feel comfortable for you anymore. And as your awareness grows, as you grow spiritually and you read things, you learn things, you go to classes, you go to workshops, you put things into practice in your life, you start noticing things that are not healthy. You start noticing dynamics that are off. You start noticing patterns that you've just taken for granted. And now you see it and it's intolerable. And you can't go back to where you were. You know that saying, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You cannot unknow what you know now. And that's something I've struggled with on my spiritual journey, is that growth. It happens with relationships of all kinds. It happens with careers. It happens with housing. I mean, just all kinds of things where it used to work and now it doesn't. So now it doesn't. That's the reality, right? Being able to face reality and what the situation is right now is what has to be done, what has to be faced. So if you are in, let's say you have a neighbor you were friends with, and now you find them intrusive and unhealthy. Well, follow that instinct. Just because they're your neighbor and you were friendly before, you can start tapering off of that, disconnecting a little bit because it's not healthy for you anymore, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with protecting yourself. I think that is the key to owning your power.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny when that awareness starts, right? You start to see that and it's like, wow, did they really just say that? It's like you never heard it before, even though you did. You've like, did they really just say that? You know, so your awareness changes too. And then, like you said, as you're doing that, you become more aware and you see what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. And corporate, I have to say, personally, corporate is one of the hardest. Oh my gosh, like I could never go back and do corporate again, knowing what I felt like a rat in a maze, you know. You're in your little cubie in your cubby, doing your work, work 9 to 5, leave. It was like a little rat, I swear to God.
I never had quite that situation, but I'm going to tell you something I had these little moments of revelation in my work life. And if anyone's listening from where I work, please forgive me for saying this, but you know it's true. So I'm not even going to say what the setting was, but my first job in mental health, I was so excited because my angels had told me, okay, now you have to leave radio and you need to work in mental health. I went back to school, changed my major to psychology, got my degree, got this job. And what I learned really quick was I was in the hornet's nest. There was so many people who were seriously mentally ill, who were psychiatrists and who were counselors and other positions there in management, just dysfunction city. And I could see it really quickly, but I wanted it to work so bad. I stayed 5.5 years, and that's like a dinosaur in that particular setting that I was in. I was one of the longest term employees they'd had. And people were dropping like flies in management positions because it was that toxic, just that bad. And finally, my angels are like, okay, you have to get out of here. You know, you got to save yourself, get out of here. But I didn't pay attention to where I was going. I was just so excited to get out of there that I went into a worse setting. And it was so funny, like the person who was supposed to be my supervisor loved her. We had a great rapport. And there was another woman there that I knew was really toxic. And she said, oh, you're not going to be working for her. You'll be equals. I'm like, okay, fine. I take the job. My second day, I find out the woman who was going to be my boss quit. And now the toxic woman would be my supervisor. And I should have just left. I knew that I should have left. It was not a good situation. And I worked 120 hours a week for 3.5 years there for little extra money. I mean, it was just awful. And I still had a teenage daughter at home. So this was just not okay. And I want to lead into something here that I think is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of owning your power. And that's being afraid of what's on the other side of making a change. I know what's going on here. What if I can't find a job? What if I leave here and I can't find a job? What if I leave here and I don't make as much money, or I don't make enough money to pay my bills? What if it's a worse situation? What if I can't even trust my judgment? I went from the frying pan into the fire. What's next? So I think that you just have to get past that and really start tuning into your gut feeling. And we talk about that a lot. What feeling do you get about the people you meet? And I'm just putting in like getting a new job, but this goes for everything. What feeling do you get about those people? What feeling do you get about the general atmosphere, the general energy there? Really tune into that. There's many instances in life where that can save you so much grief. So just something I learned the hard way. I'd like you to not have to, but you probably will, because isn't life like that?
It is. And I think when we make decisions not based on fear is one of those things. When you're making a decision out of fear, personally, it hasn't ever gone right for me. So I think when you can sit there and tune into what it does, and we're not saying don't have fear, because of course, big changes always bring some fear about in you. You have to really tune in and see, what is this? And where do I want to go? Where do I want to change? And often when it's the biggest change, sometimes is the scariest change.
It is. But my experience has been like, okay, when they said you have to leave mental health and now you're going to do your spiritual work full time, I was terrified. Mm-hmm. I did not want to work under my real name. I did not want to show my face to people. And I didn't want to go straight from the head of the mental health program for the county to doing this work full time. I was terrified. And there was some blowback with that a little bit. And some people who had a real hard time with it, but some of those people I worked with are clients of mine now. And honestly, I just don't care anymore. So I just love this work so much. And my angels were so right, because it kind of bundles up every position, every job I've ever had, and takes all the best parts of it into something that just really feeds my soul. And I think you'll find the same thing, that if you just follow your angelic guidance, you're going to end up in a place that's fantastic for you. Go ahead, Roz.
Well, I think you just touched on something really important when you said, when you were talking about, you do have to kind of reach the point where you don't care what anybody has to say about it, what anybody thinks. And you have to, now that's a real stand in your power issue, especially when it's family, especially when it's friends, because we always care what those people think, but we have to eclipse that and we have to move past it. And it is not an easy walk,
No.
It's ironic. I think that a lot of us, especially a lot of us who do this work, there's no hiding place that you have when you do this work. You are online, you are, you're social media, you're out there. And that was really difficult for me to deal with. And I just remember thinking, oh, great, my face is going to be plastered all over. I remember when my website came out many years ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, can I ride this horse? And you just have to realize that, you have to listen. You really do have to listen to your inner voice. You have to go with your gut instinct. is, women's intuition is, they'll call it that, they'll call it your gut instinct, whatever it is. But the reality is, when you become comfortable with the idea that you are receiving information from on a higher source and a different energy field, and stepping into that you really have to be grounded and not care.
There's something that a person gave to me as a gift a long time ago, and I wish I had it here. I'd read you the title of it. It's so good, but it was this thick book. I still have it. It's pink, and it has a little, like a built-in ribbon marker, and it's all about living an authentic life. And it's one of those things you're supposed to like pick a page and just read it every day. And I did for years. I loved it because I've always thought that is so important for every person to be who you really are and live how you are. And if something suddenly just isn't about you, it doesn't fit with who you really are, it doesn't fit with your authentic self, then why are you hanging on to it? Why are you hanging on to that? Because living your authentic self means being you, means being true to yourself. Nobody's going to do that for you. There's many instances as a single person and living alone where I've realized this very interesting, it's not bad, it's not good, it just is, that you alone have to be the one to really monitor yourself, your body, your mind, your spirit. Nobody can do it for you because nobody knows exactly what you're feeling in any way. Only you can do that. And so you have an obligation to protect yourself. And I think that's a big part of finding your power and stepping into it and owning it. All that good stuff is to realize that nobody can take care of you the way you can.
I love that.
Something that drives me nuts sorry, I've got little hairs. There's a fan on overhead and it's blowing little hairs around, tickling my face. Feels good though, it's hot. A long time ago, I've realized that I was not like most people. And in many ways, like my dad would always say, you march to your own drummer, you're a free bird, you're just going to do what your way. Yeah, I am. And I'm not joking about having the Let's Be Normal Club or Don't Be Normal Club. Sorry, my friend Lisa and I had that in high school in Prescott. We started that club. We had meetings and they were fun. So that is something that I think is important, is don't try to be like everybody else. Don't try to fit into what society says. This is what you should do. This is how you should do it. I don't believe in being a rebel for the sake of being a rebel, but I do believe in standing up for what is right for you and doing it your way, even if nobody else understands. You have to know you need it, you want it. There's a reason you're thinking of doing something, or the reason you're thinking of getting out of something. It goes either way. What are you waiting for? Your angels aren't going to come down and do it for you. They'll give you insight. They'll talk to you about it. Any closing thoughts on this, ladies? Just kind of last thoughts on the topic?
No, I think you hit it on the head.
Well, I hope this show today helps you just feel more confident about finding your power, setting boundaries, all these other tools that you can use to find your power, own it, and take control of your life. We're so glad that you're with us here today. If you want to know more about us, the Sedona Soul Sisters, tune into our website, sedonasoulsisters.com, and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss a thing. Tune in next Friday when the topic is living in the moment. And in the meantime, we hope you have an enlightening week.